Hey, I'm Peter Cooper. I work at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum in beautiful downtown Nashville, Tennessee. I'm here right now at the Five Spot, a legendary club in East Nashville, Tennessee, just over the Cumberland River. And I'm here today to talk with a couple of heroes of Music City, Jason Ringenberg and Webb Wilder. Jason, of course, was the frontman for Jason and the Scorchers, a band that blazed trails through Nashville and left many sound systems worse for the wear. Great rock band, winner of an Americana Music Association Lifetime Achievement Award. Webb Wilder, who has led various bands and is a terrific singer-songwriter. These guys really redefined Nashville rock and roll music and helped put down a template for what became known as Americana music, this glorious mixture of rock and roll and country and voodoo. When I moved to Nashville many years ago, I was told, hey, don't ever meet your heroes, they'll disappoint you. And then I met Jason Ringenberg and Webb Wilder, and I found the opposite to be true. They don't disappoint. They won't ever disappoint, and it's just a thrill for me to sit down and talk with these two men about their lives in music. Here's my conversation with Jason and Webb. I'm Peter Cooper. We're here with two legends of rock and roll. And rock and roll is not often associated with Nashville, but Nashville is an important center for rock and roll. I'm here with Jason Ringenberg and Webb Wilder, and I'm thrilled to be here with these two people who've been among the most important musicians in my life. Jason, you came here on July 4th, 1981. What was Nashville then, and why on earth did you think to come to this place?
If people were to visit Nashville now and then somehow take a time trip back to the summer of '81, it would be an unrecognizable city in all aspects, in all dimensions. I think the biggest thing that surprised me when I moved to Nashville, which I had never been, I moved here on July 4th. I'd never been to Nashville. And just moved here with my van load of stuff.
You were from Illinois?
From Illinois, yeah, Southern Illinois. And the first thing that surprised me was where's all these wild punk rock country bands that are going to be my competition? I was stunned that there weren't more rock and roll bands, more musicians hanging out, doing the kind of thing that I had in my head. That was the biggest surprise at first, and the biggest difference between then and today, I think.
And where were those people? They didn't exist?
They did exist, and I found out, luckily, as fate would have it, I just looked in the paper for apartments, and luckily found a place there that's now Division Street, and the apartments are still there, but it was right behind Cantrell's. I could look out my little window thing and see Cantrell's. Cantrell's was the only place in town playing original music. And there I started hanging out. I heard about another place called Springwater, which is just up the road of about a half a mile. And that's where I started really meeting people. They had a punk rock night at Springwater. And this was like 2 or 3 days after I got here. And at Springwater was this band playing Sex Pistols covers, and all these people with crazy hairdos and things, and it was there. I was like, oh, there is a soft underbelly of Nashville here. And that's where I started meeting people and starting to making connections that night.
And you made connections with Warner Hodges pretty early on?
No, actually the first person I made connections with at Springwater that night was Gigi Gaskin, who now runs Hatworks. And I told her my idea. I want to take this American roots music and make it really crazy and wild and a lot of energy and sort of punk rock sort of, roots music. And she said, go talk to that guy right there. And it was Jack Emerson. Jack Emerson, of course, became this major Americana executive, but in those days he was a college kid at Vanderbilt. And I told him what I wanted to do right on the spot. Without even thinking about it, he said, I'm in, I want to help you. What can I do? I play a little bass, and I'm on the concert committee at Vanderbilt. Carl Perkins, we had Carl Perkins coming in 3 weeks with no opening band yet. He said, if we can put a band together, I can get us a gig. I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And right off the bat, Jack, he had some other sort of buddies at Vandy, a guitar player, and he knew Barry Feltz, who was the singer for that night in No Art, that also played drums, and he wanted to be in a rockabilly band. So Jack hooked Barry up, he got the guitar player, Will Tomlinson. And 3 weeks later, we were opening for Carl Perkins. That was our first gig. The second gig we had was like a week later, opening for REM at Cantrell's. So that's how fast things happen. I remember walking into one of the music stores, I put up this flyer saying, looking for punk rock country musicians to help me make a band. And I showed the manager of the store, and he laughed at me. He laughed in my face. And said, son, it takes you like 2 years to get to know people in Nashville. This is, you better be ready for a lot of patience. In 3 weeks we were open for Carl Perkins. Wow. So that's the start of the whole genesis of Jason and the Nashville Scorchers.
And Webb, your story interweaves with Jason's story in a lot of ways.
A lot of ways, yeah.
You decided to come here. I guess you played your last gig exactly 1 year after Jason came to town.
I never knew that your apartment was right behind Cantrell's. That's amazing.
Yeah, and those apartments are still there.
That's amazing too, because we all know everything's been torn down.
That apartment's got to be worth like umpteen $1 billion now. And it's still the brick apartments, Magnolia Apartments.
Well, yeah, there's so many intertwined threads, and the last thing I want to ever do is, vampire onto someone else's success or take credit for something I don't deserve or anything like that. But yeah, see, I was born and raised in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And, to this day, I'm in touch with people I was in the first grade with. We never moved houses, much less towns, right? We never took any family vacations except to visit relatives, I had never been much of anywhere, like you had never been to Nashville, And we luckily, I grew up near New Orleans and, some cool stuff. And I was excited about going to Arkansas to meet some musicians when I was about 17. And that actually proved to be amazing too. But anyway, to get back to your question. So I was in this band down there called The Drapes, and we played our last gig July 4th, 1982. But see, back to what I was trying to say, I came here before that in '74 to go to college. And I had gone to Peabody College, which has now been absorbed by Vanderbilt.
I didn't know that. You went to Peabody?
Yeah, for 2 semesters. And it was great. That really kind of got me interested in Nashville and got me interested in getting out of Mississippi and led to me moving to Austin, back to Mississippi, and then back up here. And so like the men's dorm at Peabody was right across from Catch Records, the only Catch Records at the time. You could walk down the steps, there was a traffic light, I think, and you walk across there. So I bought Grievous Angel by Graham Parsons, Sweet Revenge by John Prine during my Peabody days. Then in the summer '75, Bobby Field, who has had tons to do with my trajectory, and I took an exploratory trip to Austin. And what we always wanted to do was music that defied category, and mixed influences. And we saw Rick Stein and the Alley Cat Band at a club called the Split Rail, which was what was considered a kicker bar back then, playing a Beau Brummel song. We said, we're moving here. All rules are broken. So, we did, and we did that for a while. And then I got this band together after I moved back to Mississippi, and we played our last gig in '82. So I said, me and my then wife, we said, we're moving to Nashville. So the only people I really knew here were Tim Krekel, another interwoven thing, and Dan Tyler, who has been a huge part of my whole story and the guy that kind of really gave me my first break. And so after we got here, we got in touch with Krekel, but we were living in Franklin. Nobody would rent us a house because I was a musician in conservative Nashville. And it may have been Tim Krekel that first told me about Jason. I know Tim was, early on a big Jason fan, and of course you wound up, recording his song. But back in those days, the Bluebird wasn't just associated with singer-songwriter rounds, so we'd go hear Tim Krekel and the Sluggers play there. And Dan had some success with a song called Bobby Sue that the Oak Ridge Boys cut, and had been a fan of the Drapes and Bobby Field's writing, so gave him a publishing deal. So he moved up here. That was key. So then I had my old compadre, who was really more of a prolific songwriter than me, and we started talking about a band or whatever, and he didn't want to be in a band, and he wanted to just write, and he was a great drummer. And but we knew Omar because he'd been in the original Howler, so he was taking these writing trips via his publishing deal to Austin to write with Omar, and he heard David Grissom play with Lou Ann Barton, and he came back and said, "I'll be your drummer." He got so fired up about it. And there's a lot of other little links in the chain. And so we found this guitar player, Donnie Roberts, who was an astounding, string bending, chicken picker kind of player, and started rehearsing with no bass player. And I think that sort of had an influence on the sound. And we finally found a great bass player named Billy Prince, but he quit. We got this guy named Cletus who was in the band a long time. And we began to know about Andy and Jack at Praxis. And we wanted to work with them. And they only worked with artists who had major deals. So I don't know, I could keep going, but we wound up working with them and getting a major deal.
You guys also have a relationship with George Bradfoot.
Yeah, and that is a great one that we both treasure, I'm sure. And I remember meeting George. I've always been a real, as you know, guitar nerd, an equipment nerd. And George is too, but he's a luthier and a lot of stuff. He can make guitars. So when Bobby was still in the band, Bobby Field, R.S. Field, 1985, we did, because he only played for less than a year as a drummer. He wanted out, and Jimmy Lester got in. We did a month's worth of Wednesdays at 12th and Porter. And there were Webb Wilder Wednesdays, If I was Theodore Thigpen, I guess I'd want Thursdays,
Right.
Could I just butt in here?
Yeah.
Just say 12th and Porter is where I met my wife, who managed that place.
Yes, that was later, but yes.
She probably booked you at one point or another.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, later. Because we played there during many different years. And
it all weaves together here.
Well, it certainly does.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, not only that, my girlfriend of many years was married to Jack Emerson. So, I mean, it really unbelievably interwoven. But that's how I met George Bradfoot, doing Webb Wilder Wednesdays at 12th and Porter. He showed up, and we started talking. He goes, "Well, I work down there at Groon's." "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I've been making a few guitars." "Really?" And boom, bam, boom. And then later, he was in my band, and I've done so many recordings with him and everything.
You both have.
Yeah.
I should have made you an uncle or a godfather or something, Webb, for one of my kids. Should have,
It's not too late.
It's not too late.
I'm wondering, there are so many connections here, and I'm wondering whether there was ever a rivalry.
Not so much. Probably a little healthy bit, just like there is with anybody you share a bill with. You want to. I mean, I think everybody who plays in a band that shares a stage secretly wants to blow the other band off the stage, But it was never mean-spirited that I remember or anything like that, because we did a lot of touring with these guys.
I was driving in thinking, and I wanted to ask you this, Webb. Do you remember the tour that we did of Germany in '89? Do you remember that?
Well, we did a bunch of stuff in Europe. Oh, yeah, that was the first one we did with you.
Right.
Yes.
You had just got your records out.
The Island record, yeah.
The Island record, the major label. Mm-hmm. And you were on top of, you guys were on fire. I mean, you guys were doing incredible shows. And we did an interview together. I believe it was in maybe Dortmund. And I still remember how, I mean, I was just depressed to the you know, the band was breaking up, Perry was getting sick.
Oh, right.
We were all falling apart, we were losing our record deal. We knew the
We
band.
didn't know, probably.
And you guys were on fire. And it was my first exposure to Webb stream of consciousness. And in that interview, we talk about competition, it was like, wow, that's how, I've done like hundreds of interviews, but that's how you do it. Webb, you were nailing it. I mean, do you remember that? You just like, you went on this tangent about rock and roll and how it was the hybrid bastard child.
The happy, loving, illegitimate child of
right.
country western rock.
And that
blues.
German journalist was just like, whoa, this Webb Wilder guy, he's something else. You know?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad you enjoyed it, but you know, sometimes I look back with mixed feelings about all that, but what we left out about all this is, and it has a lot to do with Bobby Field again, is that what gave birth to the Webb Wilder persona, which I've sort of mixed with my own persona and not worried about the character of as much in recent years, but we did this film, Webb Wilder Private Eye. Yeah. And in the early days of the band, that film was showing at 13 minutes long nationwide on cable television on a program called Night Flight. And I guess I just felt obligated, and I was encouraged by Bobby and the band and everybody in my team to sort of be this character who was part of me, but not exactly me. And the character in the film, if I had taken more of a cue from myself, was more droll and spoke more minimally, you know, because you know, I mean, I thought about Fess Parker, who I'd seen growing up playing Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, and you know, so I would try to talk like that, you know, like, well, what makes you think a UFO got her, Mr. Suggs, you know? I'm like that Greek hobo with a lamp, you know, the one who wandered from Hades to Yugoslavia. But I would get revved up and kind of go to more of a foghorn leghorn place, like I'm still capable of doing, I suppose. Excitable boy.
I think we're all capable of going to the foghorn leghorn place.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if foghorn leghorn isn't the thing that ties our whole generation together.
Well, he proved you could be large and have a showbiz career. I've always been self-conscious about being this big, so I thought I'd call myself the last of the full-grown men before anyone called me fat. That had a lot to do with that choice. And he proved you could be Southern and, you know, go nationwide, which, you know, there's been a stigma against we Southerners at times.
Yeah, there has been that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's now a stigma against Pepe Le Pew as
Oh,
well.
yeah, he's a real stinker.
Yeah. Yeah. How hard was it for y'all to be rock and rollers in Nashville? Was that was it difficult? Was it a selling point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll stand up anytime and say that being a rock and roller out of Nashville was a great selling point. And Nashville had all the tools to become a rock and roll community. It just needed some sparks and people to sort of take charge of that. Like I said earlier, the horizons were limitless in the early 80s for a Nashville rock and roll musician. There was so much space. Whereas if either one of us had went to New York or Los Angeles, we probably would have been swallowed up and just sort of smothered out, weeded out, you know. But here there was just room and an audience for it. In terms of Jason and the Nashville Scorchers, you know, we did those first few gigs, and then the other band took form with Jeff and Perry and Warner. And by November, we were selling out rooms. You know, that would have never happened in Los Angeles or Austin or New York. That would have never happened. We were selling out clubs. I mean, just clubs, but we were selling out places.
You guys stood in your own light and you were singular, so that was a real plus.
Yep.
You know, rather than worry about fitting in, you didn't worry about, you didn't,
right.
You know. And I think the timing was great because of whether you wanted to be labeled as cowpunk or not. That really got you a lot of press. And I think to this day, there's a lot more you could say about Jason and the Scorchers and Jason as a solo artist and everything else. But when the term cowpunk comes up, 9 out of 10 times, you guys are like at the top of the list. So I mean, that was a timing thing, I think, because you were sort of the first people doing like you wanted to do, combine the roots thing and make it exciting and do all the outrageous stuff with it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think that across the board, any rock and roll musician in the early and mid '80s in Nashville had a leg up on a rock and roll musician in New York or Los Angeles.
Could be.
I believe that.
We struggled a little bit because Bobby had that Music Row publishing deal, and we were kind of eclectic, and guys from labels would come hear us. We never had a record deal out of Nashville. I think a lot of credit in my case, and certainly in yours, goes to Praxis.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
I mean, Praxis was the only entity in Nashville accomplishing things in rock and roll with rock and roll artists. I mean, they weren't artists themselves; they were managers, but super informed fans and passionate lovers of all this, and had integrity, and so they wanted to work with people with integrity, and they accomplished something. And had it not been for them, there was no one else on their side of the street. And country music the country music industry here then was super square.
Oh, it was horrible.
Yeah, it was super square.
People think it's bad now, man. It was horrid in the early.
It was
80s.
like guys in double knit leisure suits. I mean,
Right.
Nobody was playing a Telecaster. That had to come from, Dwight Yoakam or wherever, it happened later. And
If they were, it was plugged in direct.
yeah, all that. The EMG noiseless pickups.
So what was Praxis for people who don't know, and who was Praxis?
Well, Praxis started with Jack Emerson and me,
Yeah.
really honestly. Jack took me under his, we formed a sort of bond in this relationship. But early on he brought in Kay Clary and brought in Andy McLennan, and they formed a sort of really tight-knit trio that had this vision to make rock and roll out of Nashville. And at first it was kind of a record company, but very quickly Jack realized that he wanted to make it a management company. And then of course him and Andy McLennan made it what it is. Now in the last years of Praxis, they were also a record company. They had the deal with Zoo, and they called themselves Zoo Praxis. They had a major label affiliation.
Which was a goal of theirs. They set out
Right.
to do it, and they
Right.
tried it with A&M, and it didn't happen, and they wound up
Right.
doing it through BMG with Zoo.
But let's just name a few of the artists that Praxis dealt with. Sonny Landreth, Steve Earle, Jason and the Scorchers, Webb Wilder, The Questionnaires,
Steve Forbert,
Steve Forbett,
briefly John Hyatt.
John Hyatt, yes. I mean, it's not an accident that the Americana Music Association named an award after Jack Emerson. I mean, without Jack Emerson, us three would not be sitting here, period. That's the way it is.
I didn't realize until years after his death just how committed Jack was to being an industry professional and an innovative one, and interfacing with big time stuff. And and he did it all, but he had bad health, and he had unreliable health, and it finally got him. And I didn't quite understand all that when we were working with him. He'd have to just leave a meeting with a terrible migraine and things like that. But he's one of those guys that all the stuff they say about him is actually true.
It's true.
It's not overstated at all. He really had a vision, and he was really serious about it. And he was in a town where nobody much cared in the other music business community. They might or might not have taken him seriously. I don't know. Because they were involved in pretty square Music Row, whatever it is, demographic driven. Like somebody told me one time, they said, all these songs that are in a publishing company that nothing ever happened with, it's because they weren't good. And I disagree. I said, who made those decisions? Those are probably people whose opinions I don't respect. So who knows what's languishing, because you didn't have Andy and Jack listening to those songs. You didn't have necessarily even real music people. That's a whole different topic, but you know.
But no, yeah,
We forgot the Georgia Satellites. I mean,
Boy.
Praxis had a #1 hit.
Big hit,
a
enduring
worldwide hit.
sure.
So
Yeah, I
once
don't-
that happened, then Music Row did pay attention to Jack and Andy.
Yeah,
in a big way.
And that hit had a lot to do with Jason and the Scorchers. I think there was a
to a minor point.
They toured together. We
think-
toured with us both.
yeah.
you know.
I think there was a legit connection and
If you don't mind me sharing one story from that, the original "Keep Your Hands to Yourself" was recorded as a demo on a little EP thing, and we were playing in London at the Marquee Club, and after the show, this was '84, a fan comes up and hands me a cassette and said, "Jason, you got to listen to this." I didn't know who this. He was just a fan. I said, "Sure. What is it?" He said, "It's a band from Georgia. You got to listen to it." Put it on my little Walkman, and it was "Keep Your Hands to Yourself" on a cassette, a demo. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is something special." I took it home to Jack 2 weeks later and said,
Wow.
"Jack, listen to this." I put it in his little cassette deck in his office and said, "You got to hear this, Jack. You just got to listen to this." And
Wow.
He took the time and listened to it and said, "Wow." And then he looked up the Satellites, found him, signed him to the management deal. Him and Andy signed him to the management deal, and then got him the deal with Elektra. And that demo, they tried to re-record and "Keep Your Hands to Yourself,"
Couldn't beat it.
and they couldn't beat it. That demo became the #1 worldwide smash hit. You know, that's true.
I didn't know that. And that's so your ear to the ground, on the front lines, cutting edge.
That is the truth.
And, you know, we did a gig with them, opening for them, and you, I'm sure, will have some stories about this place. Remember the 688 in Dallas?
Oh,
like no
Atlanta.
other place.
Right.
Yeah, and no,
688.
not Dallas, Atlanta. Gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Atlanta. Yeah. Well, anyway, we opened for them before the record came out, I guess. They were, but we really hit it off with them because I'm such a Faces fan, and Dan Baird is uber Faces fan, and they, during their sound check, they were playing the Gasoline Alley Rod Stewart riff thing to Don't Want to Discuss It, dee-dee-doon, dee-dee-doon. Now, somebody else is a fan too, you know. But Kevin Jennings, who was always their road manager, is British, you know, and he just was loyal to them, and they were loyal to him. And this was all pre-Success, you know, and there was a big crowd, and they were starting to happen, but I don't think the major label record was out or anything. And so at the end of the night, Kevin is winding up and loading their various cables into a cardboard Jack Daniels box. And he looks at me and goes, "Bleeding glamorous life, ain't it, Webb?" So fast forward to we're touring with them, the hit has happened and everything. They had individual road cases for every guitar, and then they put those inside a big guitar coffin. They had a wardrobe case inside of which hung T-shirts. And then there was a drawer at the bottom, and Rick Richards pulls it out and pulls out a bottle of whiskey and goes, "I'm not going round the horn without rum."
Yeah, they really needed a wardrobe case, that band.
I know.
yeah, absolutely.
So the drayage, as it were, on their tonnage of stuff, I can't imagine what it would cost now to transport it around the world in big airplanes and stuff.
Oh, boy.
What do you guys want to know about each other?
Well, I enjoyed asking about that interview, because that interview really affected me, actually.
I remember doing stuff with you and with Dan, in which I would go to that place.
You
but
had
I don't
just got
remember that
off a
specific one.
long, because you were on a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
And
Tour Sports,
you
only
had
reason we were there.
flown into Paris because it was a cheaper flight, and then you drove like 25 hours or something in a little van. And
We were fried.
somehow you got there, and I'm like, wow, these guys are fried. What? But you got into that interview, and when that light turned on, it was just an amazing thing. I'd never seen anybody so effective in an interview. And then you went and opened, and man, I mean, Donnie was ripping his strings off his guitar.
Yep.
And he's opening for Jason and the Scorchers, you know. I mean, you know, we knew what to do with a live stage, but you guys were brilliant that night. I mean,
Thank you. Was that
you were
Berlin?
killing it. I think it was Dortmund, I
Because
believe.
Berlin was the first gig I'd ever played in Europe, and it was the first one after that weird travel jet
No,
lag.
maybe that was Berlin, now that I'm thinking about it.
Because what I remember, I didn't remember we flew into Paris, but we flew into somewhere, and we had to get on the ferry, obviously, you know, and then we went to some other German town to try to get a few winks, but we had to get up early to get on the road, and then we played the gig, and I was so relieved when it was over, just like, oh, I think rented Marshalls, no sound check, you know, or whatever it was, and
You guys killed it on that tour. I think we did a few French dates too.
yeah.
But boy, that was a heck of a band.
But the wall had not come down yet. They were
Right.
maybe talking about it coming down. We had the Checkpoint Charlies and all that. So I get off the stage and I'm kind of like, man, I guess we got through that okay. Where's something to drink? And this U.S. military guy walked up to me. The first person I talked to after the set, and he said he was over there in the U.S. military, blah blah blah. And I'm in kind of a lighthearted, I just finished my set, you know, mood, and I said, yeah, well, what do you think about it over here? And he looked at me real gravely and said, there's a lot to think about over here. And I just really kind of sobering, you know. So yeah, big eyes open, first trip to Europe. Thanks to you, we opened for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Webb, what were your impressions of the Scorchers?
Well, that the energy level was super high, and that they had a different angle on combining the high energy thing with roots music than we did, which was good. You know, you had two different takes on it. And I didn't know then that Perry was one of the prolific songwriters in the band. I was maybe beginning to learn
Talking
that.
about Perry Baggs.
The drummer, yeah.
Drum, right.
And I thought Jason was an incredible, and he still is, an incredible performer. And Warner had this outrageous thing with metal influences, but combined with having grown up playing drums with his country music performing parents, and could nail those harmonies, and he was super high energy and could do it with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, flying through the air, and you know, so I was pretty blown away by the whole thing. Like I said, there's this kind of famous show that wasn't in Europe that was on West End Avenue at Katz where Jason climbed. What did you climb?
It was a billboard.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it seemed like everyone was there, and
Which was 81 or 82?
Well, there was two of them. There was 83 and then there was 85. 83 we were just starting to happen, and just a few people at the Katz parking lot. The 85 one was pretty intense. It was a lot of. It
was
a
that
high
the one
road.
where you chipped your tooth?
The first one I chipped my tooth.
Yeah, well, it seemed like a lot of people, but I was there, and
And how did you chip your tooth?
I just I was full of, you know, it was the biggest show he'd done in Nashville. Yeah, this was 83. And I was just full of adrenaline. I just grabbed the mic stand and, you know, was like doing that thing, and I knocked it right off. I did it myself.
to be honest, mine is slightly chipped.
SM58. Knocked the tooth right out.
See, I didn't knock one out, but to be honest, my dentist asked me, would you like to fix that? And I was like, it's going to happen again.
Y'all, how...
But he kept performing.
Yeah, it was. I didn't have to fake pain that day.
Oh, man. That's rough.
How do you keep doing it now? Just the volume you've experienced over the last 30-something years would be debilitating to most people. How do you get up and want to create?
That's a good question. Tough one. I think that if you talk to any person that's in this situation, you know, from us up to Jerry Lee and all those folks, that there's just this internal desire to be on stage. That's the one sort of common thread, you know. Other things, there's different motivations, but that's one thing. It's in you to be a performer, and you just have to do it, and you find a way to do it. That's just the one thing that keeps us all in. I've always said that if you're into it for the glamour or the money or the sort of career aspects, you won't last, because most of that stuff's not going to happen anyway, or it's going to happen very erratically. So it's just this thing. For me personally, it's the connecting with the audience is just a magic thing to me that never gets old. I don't understand quite how it happens, but there's this connection with people that you're connecting with a whole room full of people, and it's just an enormous privilege to be able to do that. I guess at the end of the day, that's what drives me.
I've always had all those feelings, and having not done any live shows where you travel and stuff since last March, and getting older now, I do wonder about just the stamina to do like real stuff because it's just so ridiculous to travel all day, wolf down some coffee and some food, throw your gear on the stage, maybe brush your teeth and do a show, and go sleep somewhere strange where you may not can sleep long, even if you could sleep, and do it again, But I've always been that guy who wanted to perform, and that's why I did it. I don't regret doing it, and we'll see what happens in the future. I think the creative thing is just in you too, even if you're not real productive about it. You can. It's kind of the way you live your life. I went through a period when I had a little more time earlier in the pandemic when I'd started drawing with these highlighters, just because my girlfriend had them in a drawer, and I started drawing little pictures and putting colorful borders on them and stuff, and then putting them on Instagram and things. And I mean, that sounds like, yes, here at the home, Webb is doing well with basket weaving, But it's creative, it's an outlet, and it was kind of neat because it was something I had not done previously.
True.
Y'all, thanks so much for talking.
Peter, thanks for doing this.
Yes, sir.
It's always.
Well, I'm being highly paid, and no, I'm always honored to be in your presence.
Well, if I may just say something while we're on the subject of Peter Cooper, that, I mean, you're now known as a real singer-songwriter and performer yourself. But, all these last 20 years, you have helped keep the other side of Nashville. You've given us a format to have some legitimacy in the world. The sort of left field artists like me and Webb and so many others, you've noticed us and you've given us that opportunity to be who we are and to appreciate us and to give us that sort of outlet to the world, which without you, I'm not sure a lot of us would have gotten as much of that attention from the outside world. I mean, you were really able to do that. And, now you're one of the major players at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and, you've killed it, Peter, on not just a career level, but on a personal way as well, the way you handle people around the whole planet. It's just really cool. Thank you.
Well, yeah, you have couched our legacies in terms of importance, whether we deserve it or not, that had you not been around to do it. As a journalist, and an interviewer, and a supporter, I don't know that anyone else would have, or it certainly helps to what Jason said, to sort of format us into something that mattered and matters. And along the way, of course, you've been a journalist, a musicologist, let's face it, and a singer-songwriter, and a touring musician yourself, and sometimes done them all at the same time, and record producer.
That's right. Grammy-nominated record producer.
There you go. Right. So, I mean, that's no grocery list. That's a real resume.
And Grammy-nominated means Grammy losing. And,
I'd still rather lose that than,
yeah.
Right.
No.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Webb.
I've never
Thank you
listened.
both.
I've never listened much to your music and don't like you personally. So, yeah, guys, we've talked a lot about the past. What about the future?
Yeah, I'd like to say I have two things happening that I'm very excited about. One is May 8th, we're doing a record release concert at my farm, at my farm in front of my chicken house.
Killer.
So I'm so excited about that. And it's, all socially distanced, it's all outdoors, If you want to sit on top of my chicken house and watch the show, more power to you.
Are the chickens 6 feet apart?
The chickens, they're pretty strict about that sort of thing, yeah. So that's May 8th, and I'm also doing another record release show at Eddie's Attic in Atlanta, Georgia on June 5th. So be watching for those two things for me.
Webb, you up to anything?
Well, and also, your album is out now, right? I know it's at radio.
Rhinestone is out, yes.
Yes.
Sir.
And
yes.
we talked about the commonality of George Bradfoot. He produced it,
Right.
Did a great job, played lots of instruments on it. My most recent album, which came out last April 10th, George co-produced with me and played tons of stuff on. And I've been doing these monthly streaming shows. I'm doing one tomorrow night, and they all live after the fact on webwilder.official, Facebook Live, and YouTube. And I'm doing a lot of radio for WMOT Roots Radio as an on-air personality. I do a weekly chart show and Monday through Thursday afternoon shows. And where all this will lead and what's next, I don't know. But I've noticed that I haven't lost interest. You know, I think that's the thing, like you were talking about, where I'll feel this compulsion to perform or whatever, and whatever it is, be it writing, singing, playing. If nothing else, the pandemic has proven to me that I can sing and play at home if that's all I can get together, you know. And we'll see about solo band dates on the road and things like that, you know. Bruce Springsteen played one of my songs on his radio show recently. That was my claim to fame of late.
That's a big thing. He played a Scorcher song once on this show, My Kingdom for a Car.
That's great.
That is something I did like tell my mom about. You know?
Yeah, which is your version of a Phil Oakes
song. That's right. That's right.
I could never impress my mom with who we'd played with. I told her one time, I said, yeah, we played with Bo Diddley. She said, who's that? Okay.
Guys, thank you so much for
Thank you.
talking with me.
Yeehaw to you, Peter.